I just feel like I've been around the block, ripping up fantasy stock, working around the clock. Look at the view from the top. Researching rookies a lot? No, I just be listening to pods. Yeah, one in particular, I'm just a messenger. Let me just pass on the rock. Browning, brunning, pruning, pronouncing ain't what he's doing. What he's doing is not losing, but infusing you with new things. And there's Dennis the Bennett, yeah. The man is a menace, yeah. Building a dynasty, some of the finest things. Promise you, you won't regret it. Sly as a fox, cultured in pop. Give him his props. Here is a thought, here is a box, and you cannot compare them at all. So don't even try. Careful with the news, but when you use a take, I take up Tony Fire. I mean Dyer, because anyone else is a huge mistake. Whoa, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, yeah. Fantasy round table, come take a look at the crown, baby. Hey, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, woo. Fantasy round table, come take a look at the crown, baby. Go.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Roundtable Podcast. It is Friday and we are cruising to the end of another week and the end of another division in our previews. We're going to be looking at the NFC North Part 2, the Minnesota Vikings and the Chicago Bears today. Dennis, how was the rest of your week?
You know, it's been a weird week. My cars are breaking down. Been busy at work. It's hot. The boys' baseball games are getting rained out. Caleb's band was supposed to be done with shows after last Saturday until like the end of July, early August, and he keeps adding shows. So, you know, the grind never stops.
It doesn't, and the grind never stops for us in fantasy either. As we discussed a little bit earlier this off season, we did a startup dynasty league. That was a real kind of fun, putting the draft together, getting ready for the first season. And as part of that, as we're going through previews, we wanted to bring on some of the guys that are in the league with us, especially when we're getting to one of their favorite teams. And so that brings us to our guest today, Jacob Dreyer, who is with us in the league and is also a big Vikings fan. So hopefully you're excited about both the season and getting to talk Vikings today.
You know, I think we're excited for the future. I don't know how much of the future contains this season.
Well, I know, Jacob, I connected with you the same way I met Dennis and Matt all those many moons ago on the old Fantasy Life app.
That seems like so long ago.
I know.
Like I still had hair on top of my head then.
We all, I think, still use the same handle from there, though, because I was Nighthawk7734 on there. I know you were Culture. You weren't Culture.
I was
Panhandles. That's right.
Yeah, named after the infamous Columbus Panhandles, one of the first teams in the early NFL from, I think they were 1901 to 1926. The first few years they weren't in the NFL, and then they were not a great team. Named after a factory that literally made handles for pans.
I'll got to do something. But Jacob, how did you first get into fantasy?
Well, you know, actually earlier this year, me and a lot of the guys from my home league were talking about that because we all kind of figured out we had been playing fantasy football for over 20 years. Our home league now is in year 10, and so we waited a little while to get that one going. But yeah, sometime in middle school, started playing fantasy football, had the ups and downs, but loved it. Loved statistics, loved sports. I was an athlete myself, and just really got into fantasy football a lot. And so now I'm the commissioner of multiple leagues, as I'm sure both of you are, and then I play in a few others with very good commissioners like you all. So very excited to still be playing fantasy football. It's been a great way to stay connected to a lot of people, but then obviously just really love football.
So what'd you play?
I played collegiate tennis. So I was a tennis athlete for the majority of my life. But back in high school, I played basketball, football, and baseball as well.
I feel like you used to be a sports information director too, right?
Yeah, so my professional career started in sports information. I worked 2 years at South Dakota State in the years of Zach Zenner, if you recall that name from the NFL. He ran for the Detroit Lions. And also Nate Walters, who went to the NBA and played for the Milwaukee Bucks for a little while as well. And so I got to see a lot of really incredible athletes in my time there. And then even worked for one more year at a Division III school in Southern Iowa before I transitioned into nonprofit communications.
Yeah, when you mention the Lions, you're definitely speaking Dennis's love language.
One pride, baby.
He was very excited on Tuesday when we were able to cover the Lions. Well, I know you live now in the Minnesota region. What kind of drew you to the Vikings?
Well, I lived the majority of my life in Iowa, and so all of my friends would tell you I was a bandwagon fan. I liked different teams at different times, depending on just players that I really connected with. I was a Broncos fan for a little while during the Terrell Davis era. Really enjoyed watching them win, and so had a lot of jerseys, a lot of shirts for them as well. But when I got married and when we started to put our life together and we landed in Rochester, Minnesota, it just felt right to really commit to being a fan of the team. And so it hasn't been a lifelong journey for me as a Vikings fan. I don't have all of the heartache that everybody else has dealt with. But we moved up here, a little bit more than 7 years ago now. And so really have dove into the Viking culture.
And, happy wife, happy life. So that is the right decision.
You play on the flugelhorn.
Yeah, I don't know how to do that. But, I got to do it at games.
Well, let us dive in and kick off previews with said Vikings. In 2023, they finished 7-10, third in the NFC North. Key departures: Kirk Cousins left via free agency to the Atlanta Falcons. Josh Dobbs left and is backing up in San Francisco. Alexander Madison left. And boy, Dennis, I don't know if you heard on the NFL radio when he was talking about what wonderful things he was going to do as potentially RB1 for the Raiders, but that was a good laugh for me. And KJ Osborne left as a wide receiver and is with the Patriots. Additions they brought in: Sam Darnold coming over from the 49ers at quarterback. They grabbed Aaron Jones at running back from the Packers. Trent Sherfield last year, I believe, was with Buffalo, comes over at wide receiver, and Robert Tonyan, who spent last year with the Bears, previously with the Packers, now with the Vikings. Maybe at some point he'll go on to Detroit so he can catch the entire set there. In the draft, their biggest draft pick was J.J. McCarthy, potential new franchise quarterback out of Michigan, but they also grabbed a fantastic edge player in Dallas Turner, who a lot of people have high hopes for as being a potential rookie of the year on defense. 2023 fantasy finishes: Cousins only played 8 games, finished as QB 24. Their best finishing QB was Josh Dobbs, who came over and played quite a few games, finished as QB 20. Nick Mullins finished as QB 39. Also ended the Vikings season pretty effectively with some of the games that he played down the stretch. In the backfield, Madison was running back 38. Tice Chandler was running back 48, though had some flashes at the end of the season. Aaron Jones, for comparison, was running back 37 in Green Bay, missed a lot of time with injury himself. Among wide receivers, Justin Jefferson missed quite a few games, which is why he only finished as wide receiver 33, but we expect with full health he'll be up in the top 3 at least. Jordan Addison, rookie year, finished as wide receiver 23, a great promising sign. TJ Hawkinson finished as tight end 4, but injured late in the year, so there is a fairly decent chance that he will not be available to start the season. Jacob, I'm going to start this one with you. What are your fantasy hopes? Who do you expect to see at quarterback, and what are you thinking that you're going to see from this passing game and this new backfield?
Well, we may be Minnesota nice up here in the north, but we are not the most optimistic fan base, that is for certain. There's been a lot of discussion about a lot of things going into this year. Are we going to see J.J. McCarthy at all this year? Is Jordan Addison more of a fluke, especially because he played a lot without Justin Jefferson? And if you do a deep dive into the analytics for him, they weren't super promising, even though he did put up a lot of numbers. A lot of it was touchdown dependent. He finished tied for 4th in the league in receiving touchdowns. And so I think as we go into this year from a fantasy perspective, there's not a ton to be optimistic about. The backfield, I would expect more of a split backfield. The coaching staff does really like Ty Chandler, so I don't expect Aaron Jones to come in and finish significantly higher than he did last year. He might be kind of a low-end running back 2, would be my guess. I don't envision us being a super high-scoring team because I do think that Sam Darnold starts most of the season. I think that we'll start to hear the rumblings during our Week 6 bye because You know, if you go just simply off of the eye test, we're probably entering that bye with a 1-4 record. And so will they start talking about JJ getting some reps there? You know, if I had to predict whether or not we see JJ, it would probably be somewhere more around the week 11 mark, because I don't imagine we'll get many wins between week 6 and week 11. But that's when we would maybe have a little bit of a softer matchup at Tennessee, and maybe that's where they would want to get him onto the field for the first time. But when you're talking about our pass catchers going into this year, you know, Jordan Addison, as you said, had a very good finish in terms of his wide receiver ranking. But Sam Darnold, when he's been the starting quarterback throughout his career, he's never produced a wide receiver 1. And so it's hard to look at what he's going to bring to the offense and say that Justin Jefferson is that high-end wide receiver 1 this year. It's hard to look at it and say that Jordan Addison is going to finish anywhere, you know, higher than he did last year, especially with Jefferson on the field. I got to imagine Jefferson's going to be a ball hog, going to command a lot of targets, particularly while Hawkinson is still recovering. So, you know, are you taking Justin Jefferson in fantasy football in the first round? Probably simply based off of pedigree, but I wouldn't probably feel the best about it. I do like drafting Jordan Addison as a guy who you can get kind of as your wide receiver 4 in a lot of instances, but there's not a ton to be excited about, particularly if Hawkinson is on the mend for half the season, which it's starting to sound more and more likely that he's not ready for quite a while.
Johnny Munt season.
I'm not looking forward to a half a season of Johnny Munt. That's for sure. I agree with you. I think they're going to be down in scoring, and they're going to rely on Jones and Chandler, which should be good. I think that whoever the quarterback is, Jefferson will be fine. I think he's still a wide receiver 1. I think he's still a top 8 wide receiver. They're going to get him the ball. O'Connell comes from that McVay tree. And, you know, we've seen what happened with when Nakua was in for Cup. And so I think they'll definitely continue to feed Jefferson, regardless of who the quarterback is. But I agree with you. There are some concerns about what kind of production is Jordan Addison going to give you. And, you know, I'm not sold on Brandon Powell. So the funnel in Minnesota is pretty narrow. And I think it stays narrow even when Hawkinson comes back. That's probably who will affect Addison the most. So if Hawkinson misses half of the season, if it's a non-dynasty league, I may be looking to sell Addison around, you know, week 6 or 7, right before Hawkinson comes back. Just not that I think Hawkinson will necessarily overtake Addison, but I think he'll cannibalize Addison's numbers some. And then Aaron Jones is a really good pass catcher as well. The trouble I think is going to be that will Brian Flores be able to get the defense clicking every single game, and you know, can they produce turnovers? Right now they don't have any of the rookies listed. Let's see, make sure on our lads listed as a starter, though they did draft Dallas Turner, and he's behind Andrew Van Ginkel, who's coming off an injury. So, you know, Turner's really good, and he may push and add some energy to that defense. But Jerry Tillery, you know, a lot of fanfare coming in Tennessee, and I don't think he ever quite lived up to his press. Harrison Phillips, you know, he's a solid guy. It'll come down to what's left in the tank with Harrison Smith. You know, can he produce on the back end, create turnovers? If they can give Darnold and or McCarthy a short field several times, it may be very helpful for fantasy. It's just going to come down to, you know, can the defense get off the field? And when given the chance, will Jefferson be able to put the team on his back? I agree with you. I don't have, you know, I don't have high expectations for them this year.
Well, and the real question, I think, that we're going to have to monitor with them going through camp and everything is quarterback. Everything the Vikings have seemingly said is Sam Darnold is our starting quarterback right now. But if you look, like every fantasy app has Darnold projected week 1 with 0 fantasy points and JJ McCarthy with like 15 fantasy points. I tend to be more with you. I think we see Sam Darnold for a majority of the season. Actually, my last QB sleeper for Campus to Canton, my last QB sleeper article for 2024, I wrote Sam Darnold because I think there is a fairly decent chance that he is a starter for a lot of the season. I think there's probably going to be a couple of these teams not named Atlanta that took first round quarterbacks that don't wheel them out right to begin with. I wouldn't be shocked if New England, we mentioned that. We wouldn't be shocked if New England didn't. Only God knows what Denver's going to do. Keeping that one a secret, But for Minnesota, I think the real question is about Darnold, because it's like a tale of two Darnolds we've seen throughout his career. He had an uneven rookie year, but when he came back in year 2, he had that stupid mono thing and then the chasing ghosts that everybody talks about. But if you looked at his numbers, his second year with the Jets, the reason Jets fans got excited going into year 3 was he was actually 7-6 as a starter with kind of a wonky team and showed some real promising signs toward the end. And then the wheels just completely fell off in year 3. And then he got traded to Carolina. And that first set of games before he got hurt with Carolina, we were like, oh, this is some kind of a
guy we expected coming out.
And then the wheels fell off the bus, and they brought in Baker Mayfield, and everybody almost has forgotten that when he got reinstalled in the dumpster fire that was Carolina, that's one of the reasons they didn't have as high of a draft pick, because he finished that season really well, which is why the 49ers picked him up. And I'm very curious to see what he got out of a year playing with Kyle Shanahan in San Francisco as a backup. We didn't get to see him much on the field, but they seem to have real good confidence in him. And so I'll be curious to see what we can get in Minnesota. He definitely will have the best set of receivers that he's had outside of, there were good receivers in San Francisco, but that wasn't his team. But this is better than anything the Jets gave him or Carolina. Those Carolina teams, it was what Robbie Chosen or Chosen Anderson or Robbie Anderson, whatever name he was going by at the time.
Looks like it's still Twitter. He's still Robbie Anderson.
Yeah. So, well, it sounds like we think we're probably going to get Darnold. And it could be a little bit of a growing, when we were talking on Tuesday, obviously Detroit went pretty far last year, returns a pretty good team. Green Bay put a lot of things together at the end of last year. Chicago has made some big moves this offseason, which we'll get to in a minute. But Dennis, I'll start with you. How are you feeling about the Vikings in 2024?
Not great, Bob. Not great. I have them at the bottom of the division. Or excuse me, I thought I did. No, they're tied with the Bears, whom we're also covering, at 5-12. I agree. I had them 0-5, and listening to you talk, Jacob, I was like, a 1-4 start seems reasonable. So I ended up giving them a win over the Giants on the road to open it. I just feel like I'm torn on that one because, like 2 years ago, I was in on the Giants, and I expected them to take a step last year. Jones got hurt. There were just a lot of things. Darren Waller, he's a plague on seemingly the last few teams he's played on because he can't stay healthy, and it just brought everything down. They had awful wide receivers in New York. Their issue is really the offensive line, and they didn't do a ton. So I ended up going and switching back and giving Minnesota and the fighting Sam Darnold's a victory there in week 1. I do think they'll get better as the season goes on. I have them picking up their second win in week 9 at home against Indianapolis. The only road win I have them getting is week 1 versus the Giants. But I do have them beating the Falcons, the Bears, and in week 17, I got them beating the Green Bay Packers at home. I think that as much as I like the Packers, it's a division game. It'll be at the end. The Vikings, they're going to be really playing for pride, and I feel like they fight real hard for O'Connell and Flores. If the team goes south and it feels like they lose the team, it could get bad. But I don't think the team is built that way. I think they've got hope. I don't think McCarthy is an elite quarterback by any stretch, and that's not just because I fucking hate the Wolverines. Anyways, I'm sorry, I digress. I almost lost it. I think McCarthy's Alex Smith. He's an okay quarterback. He's not gonna be a guy that can put a team on his back and carry them to victory. But I think we've seen with guys like Brock Purdy that you don't necessarily need that guy if you put the right team around him. So Justin Jefferson is a great place to start with putting the right team around him, but they're going to have to improve their offensive line some. They have Dalton Risner, who's a cast off from Denver, and Garrett Bradbury, who is a few years older now. I think O'Neal and Darisaw both have great pedigrees. Getting an interior stud next year, I think, will be really helpful for them. You see what San Francisco did by building up that and then putting, by all accounts, a mediocre athletic talent in at quarterback that just makes great decisions. I think McCarthy can make real good decisions. So next year should bode well. The number one decision he has to make is get the ball to Justin Jefferson. It's not rocket science, but I don't have him having a great year this year.
How are you feeling, Jacob?
Well, it sounds like we kind of came to the same result, but maybe with just a little different route to get there, because looking at their schedule, I also see them finishing about 5-12. I think worst case scenario, you're talking a 3-14 team. I do think that we're going to finish fourth in the division. I would like to think that we're probably the best fourth place team across the NFL at this point, but yeah, it's going to be a tough stretch to start the season. Like you said, I do have them winning week 1 at New York, but then you talk about San Francisco, Houston, Green Bay, and then the Jets in London. That's just a really tough schedule to start the season. And I actually don't have them winning a second game until week 11. So that's when you talk about, will JJ McCarthy get the call? Because I do see us being something in the 1-8, maybe 2-7 range come week 11. And so are we going to bring him on at that point? I got to believe he's going to get the chance this season to start, because it's the highest draft pick we've ever spent on a quarterback in franchise history. So we drafted, obviously, Dante Culpepper 11th. We drafted Christian Ponder 12th. We all know how all those worked out. But now with JJ McCarthy, there's obviously high hopes, especially with our coaching staff, that they're going to really be able to coach him up. But it's a lot of change this year, and so I don't imagine we're going to be able to overcome all of that change. It'll be the first time since 2018 that we have both a new leading passer and a new leading rusher in our backfield. So it's a lot. It's a lot of learning going on. And do I truly believe that Sam Darnold is a guy who's going to be able to get it done for us? No, I actually only envision us getting one win in the division, and that's when we host Chicago. I don't think we're good enough to beat Green Bay either time. I don't think we're going to beat Detroit either time. So I think it's going to be a long season, but kind of like you said, I think it will end on a semi-positive note. I do have us winning 4 of our final 8. So we'll go into next year probably with a little bit of optimism. As I said to Matt on draft night, the fact that we were able to get McCarthy and Turner and keep next year's first-round pick, I think, was a huge thing for our front office. And so hopefully we can use these picks to really build for the future, because we still were able to have one.
Yeah, I think we're all kind of on the same page. I had them in that 4-6 win range too, but I think they'll be probably fun to watch at times and competitive at times. And a lot of times you see with young teams, they get better towards the end of the season, especially, if by the time they put McCarthy in there, Hawkinson has been back and is kind of in the flow, and you can see what an offense looks like with him and Addison and Jefferson, because you got to figure, I kind of think that they will probably turn over the backfield again after this year, and Jones on a 1-year deal. I guess it depends on whether Ty Chandler ends up being the guy, but you could have some changes there. But starting to get a picture of what your offense could be like going forward. I think signing Jefferson to that long-term extension before the season is great. Means everybody can kind of be excited and moving forward, and hopefully that'll allay any frustrations those wide receivers might have going through the first part of the season and growing pains and stuff. I just hope they give McCarthy a little bit of time and give him a good chance to develop, because I don't know, like you said, throwing him out for a stretch that's Green Bay, Houston, San Francisco, a few weeks in. That's weird. We talked about the same thing when we were talking about Drake May looking at the Patriots schedule. It would make me nervous if I thought you were just chucking him out there. And at least in Minnesota, just JJ McCarthy has Justin Jefferson. Drake May's out there like, oh, Hunter Henry, cool. So.
Oh man, yeah. And I think anything can happen in the NFL. I'm sure you guys have already covered that with many teams. In 2022, the Vikings were 11-0 in one-score games, and then last season we were 6-8 in one-score games. So you never know. Maybe we'll keep it close enough because we do have a defense that people are excited about. Brian Flores has really been able to build the defense the way he wants it. And so it's been kind of a bend, don't break defense for him thus far in Minnesota. I mean, you're talking about last year we were 16th in yards allowed, but 14th in points allowed. Like, we're right in the middle of the road. And so will these picks this year really turn that around and give us a chance to win those field position games, win a couple extra games? Maybe, but in the end, we're not a playoff team this year, and that's okay.
Well, let's flip to our second team as we finish out this division, and that is the Chicago Bears. They also finished 7-10 last year, technically fourth in the NFC North, losing the tiebreaker to the Vikings. Key departures: Justin Fields was traded to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Deonta Foreman moved on and is now with the Cleveland Browns. Darnell Mooney left and is now with Kirk Cousins and the Atlanta Falcons. Key additions: they picked up DeAndre Swift from the Lions and Eagles at running back to give them some pop in the backfield. They went and traded for Keenan Allen, a wide receiver who comes over from the Chargers, and they signed former Chargers tight end Gerald Everett. In the draft, they also went quarterback at 101, grabbing Caleb Williams, and with the 9th pick in the first round, they grabbed wide receiver Rome Odunze. Fantasy finishes from 2023. Justin Fields missed a spate of games there with a thumb injury, but did finish as QB 18. In the backfield, they had a three-headed kind of monster at times. Khalil Herbert was their best finisher at running back 43. Roshan Johnson, running back 47. Both those guys are still there. DeAndre Swift, by comparison, finished as running back 20 last year for the Philadelphia Eagles. DJ Moore, who came over in a trade last year, finished as wide receiver 6. Darnell Mooney, who is now gone, it was wide receiver 83. Keenan Allen, though, with the Chargers last year, was pretty healthy and finished as wide receiver 8. So there is all the potential that they could have a couple really great receivers. Cole Kmet at tight end finished as tight end 8. Dennis, I'll start with you with the Bears. How are you feeling about this team for fantasy? A completely new world. We know since they moved on from Fields, Caleb Williams is definitely going to be one of those rookie quarterbacks starting week 1, unless something weird happens. I don't think they want to start the Tyson Bagent franchise, but they have new receivers, new running back, new offensive coordinator. What are you expecting?
Well, first off, I just want to let it be known that I'm bitter they did not give Justin Fields the support that they've given Caleb Williams. That to me is a crock of BS. That being said, I love the acquisition of Allen. DJ Moore is probably one of the most underrated wide receivers and underrated fantasy assets over the last few years. He just keeps producing 1,000-yard seasons. And I think he's still going to be the wide receiver 1 in Chicago. Keenan's had a little bit of an injury history, but he's been healthy most of the last few seasons. He's never been known for being fast. Chicago has him set up to be the slot guy. Roma Dunze, I think, is going to get the Jackson Smith and Jigba treatment this year, because I do think they like what they have in Cole Kmet at tight end, and then bringing Gerald Everett in puts him in a nice position to flex Everett out and keep Kmet in line and go with DeAndre Swift in a one-back set. It's my concern with the running backs is that they continue to have this 2 or 3-headed monster back there, even though you brought in DeAndre Swift. Now, as a Lions fan, I can say that DeAndre Swift has the reputation for being a little bit soft, and so maybe keeping Herbert and Roschon involved will be okay. I expect Swift to be the most productive back. I don't think Williams is going to run a lot. I think he'll run when he has to. We see a lot of, athletic quarterbacks coming into the league nowadays that are going out of their way to be pocket passers. And that's fine because I think long-term you can only run for so long. As somebody who's a big Lamar Jackson fan, he's a good-sized guy, 6'2", 220, but, he can't – we're getting to the end of these, 900-yard seasons for Lamar. He's going to have to get better as a passer. So I think Caleb's going to come in, and he's going to be passing from the get-go. They've invested in the offensive line with Braxton Jones and Darnell White. They brought in Tevin Jenkins as a second-rounder. So they're trying to do all the right things on the offense. It's been a struggle with the offensive coordinators, really. And so I do have some concerns because they got a new Shane Waldron's the new OC. He came over from Seattle. Is that correct?
Yes, which makes it actually kind of interesting. So I'm just going to give these numbers before you guys finish. Shane Waldron was the OC for Seattle. Seattle, as you alluded to, had 3 receivers, 2 veterans, brought in a rookie, and they had a tight end, Noah Fant. So when we're trying to figure out, where can they finish? Seattle's finishes last year, Metcalf finished as wide receiver 15. Tyler Lockett was wide receiver 34. Jackson Smith and Jigba was wide receiver 51. And then Noah Fant was tight end 33. And that's where, for me, something's got to give. Last year, if you looked at the players that are on their team, they had a wide receiver 1 and a tight end 1, and they imported somebody else's wide receiver 1. There's no way, to me, in this Shane Waldron system, we're seeing a tight end finish top 10 and 2 receivers finish in the top 10.
Yeah, it's I want to buy into this team, but you're going to have to pick the right players. And much like DK Metcalf last year, it's going to be a little bit of whack-a-mole. And so, while Metcalf may have finished as wide receiver 15, I think there were some weeks that you were not quite so high on him. I think DJ Moore will be a little more consistent. I think his game in general bodes well for consistency more so than DK Metcalf's game. But then Keenan Allen is that safety blanket. He could end up taking targets just because we got a rookie quarterback trying to get comfortable. And that may impact DJ Moore. Probably going to impact, like you said, Cole Kmet more. It's tough to go heavily invested in redraft in a team being led by a rookie quarterback and a defensive-minded head coach that's on his 3rd offensive coordinator in the last 4 years or something. So I'm investing in the Bears with pause in redraft. In Dynasty, I'm perfectly happy grabbing Williams. I'm happy grabbing Roma Dunze and DJ Moore. Keenan Allen, I'm not looking so much long-term. I do think we see the sun setting on his career and his production. I think he could still have a good year this year, but it's time to get out.
Yeah, I think when you're looking at this Bears team and you talk about Caleb Williams and what he's going to bring to the field, when you're trying to guess the statistics of what he's going to do, if you look at his senior year at USC, the top 4 players in terms of receptions were all wide receivers. So his 5th highest reception target was his tight end. And then you had to go another 4 wide receivers before you got to Lloyd. And so I don't envision DeAndre Swift having the type of receiving year that I think a lot of us would assume, or maybe even have felt like we've grown accustomed to. And I don't think that Cole Kmet's going to really be someone who's going to be a serviceable tight end even for most of this season. When you talk about the difference between DJ Moore and Keenan Allen, his top 2 receivers were pretty close at USC. I think it was something like 60 receptions to 45 receptions. So he spreads the ball around, especially when he has weapons, and the Bears, for better or worse, in fantasy purposes, have done a great job surrounding him with weapons. So I don't envision any of his wide receivers becoming superstars, particularly in this first year. But I do think DJ Moore is just a really talented wide receiver. I mean, we just talked about Sam Darnold, and even with splitting between Sam Darnold and Baker, I believe in his last year at Carolina, he was like wide receiver 18. So he's going to have the opportunity, I think, with Caleb Williams to perform in that high-end wide receiver 2 area is what I would guess. But I don't envision them being a super dynamic offense in terms of having 1 or 2 standout guys. I think it's going to be a lot more spread out than maybe we even think at this time.
Well, and that would sort of fit too with Shane Waldron. Looking at 2023, when he had the kind of similar 3 receiver option package with that offense in Seattle, 122 targets to Lockett, 119 targets to Metcalf, 93 targets to JSN. They really spread the ball around. Metcalf missed 1 game, but other than that, Fant, JSN, Lockett, they all played all 17 games. You didn't see as many targets going to backs, or, Noah Fant at tight end only saw 43 targets. They had another tight end, Parkinson, that they used, who saw 34. So, maybe in the 60 to 70 target range. But Kmet is the one, if a lot of people – the other thing about Kmet being tight end 8 from last year is incredibly deceiving. Of the 17 games he appeared in, 12 of them he scored less than 8 points. So he was kind of a real boom guy. He had 2 games where he was in the 20-point range and a couple in the teens that really balanced out. But he also had like 3 or 4 games where he had a 0. He had a game where he was below a point. Of those 12 games where he was below 8 points, 11 of them he was below 6 points. So I don't know if he was a huge part of their offense before. That's a place to me where the number is – a little bit deceiving. And I actually think that he's probably the one I'm staying away from the most, because I've seen his ADP is pretty decently high, because people, have those expectations based on how he finished and stuff last year. I think I tend to think there probably will be a little bit of a growth process for Rome Odunze too. I wouldn't be surprised if he was in the wide receiver 45 to 60 range, where the other 2, I think Keenan Allen could finish, between 20 and 32, and probably see DJ Moore between 12 and 18. I do think they're going to throw a fair amount. The real question, like you said, Dennis, is what is that backfield split going to be? Contract year for Khalil Herbert, I think they've fairly well decided he's not their guy moving forward. Do they commit a big share to DeAndre Swift? Last year, Seattle's another good kind of harbinger for that, because they had both Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. Both those guys were fairly involved. Walker was available 15 games, Charbonnet 16. They kind of split carries. You saw 219 for Walker, 108 for Charbonnet. I kind of wonder if they want to get Roschon Johnson going a little bit more here in year 2 and see what they have in terms of a platoon with Swift and Roschon Johnson. My concern would be that Herbert, it kind of ends up being the odd guy out there. So Jacob, I'll start with you. How do you feel about the 2024 Bears?
Well, since I put the Vikings at 4th, I guess that means I'm putting the Bears at 3rd. But I do think that there's a potential that we could come into that final game of the season where they're squaring off with the Packers, and that could be something that impacts the standings. I think as I work through their schedule, maybe a little bit more optimistic just based on the way they've built their team. I kind of have them finishing somewhere around 10 wins. And so maybe that last game of the year, if that one goes either way, it could be 9 or 10. But I think they could be in the picture for that last wild card spot if they lose that game. I think, it's the sky's really the limit, and it's probably mostly how much you believe in Caleb Williams as one of these once-in-a-generation prospects. I happen to believe that he is going to be a very good quarterback, and I think that they've built a good enough team around him that even those growing pains might not be as significant as they will be for other rookie quarterbacks.
I like Williams' talent, and I've drafted a significant amount of Caleb Williams in rookie drafts where I had the 101. But I don't think the Bears are going to be any better than the Vikings this year. I have them finished tied. I think the Bears are going to win against Tennessee week 1. There's going to be, a rush of excitement. I think they win against the Chargers in week 4 because it's that team going east and playing that, so many teams struggle, especially the Chargers. Week 5, I got them beating Carolina because, Carolina's been awful, and they've got a whole new thing going on. So I like where the Bears are going. I think, though, if they finish tied for last, we might be in the situation where they're getting a new head coach next year. I'm not sure what's going to have to happen for them to finish, 5-12, 6-11, and Eberflus to keep his job. Maybe he's building it in the right direction. But to me, when I look at it and I see 3 offensive coordinators in 4 years, 2 high first-round draft picks on quarterbacks, bailing on 1 after 2 seasons, 3 seasons, it seems like you clean house from the top down there if they finish 5-12.
So this is Eberflus's 3rd season.
Okay.
Justin Fields was taken by Nagy.
Okay.
And that's probably why they flipped offensive coordinators the first time. I'm not saying he's been a great coach, but I tend to agree with you. He's 10-24 in 2 years. They were 3-14 his first year. Not great, Bob. They were 7-10 last year, though, and I thought they showed some signs of progress, not just on offense with Fields, but I actually thought their defense got a little bit better. I think that's an underrated thing, which that had to have been their hope because Eberflus was a defensive coordinator. They had to have hoped that his defense was going to get better. I'm actually not too far off from Jacob. We have seen incremental progress. I don't think the Bears make the playoffs. I know some people have been there. They're going to go. They're the team that's going to go from worst to first and get into the playoffs. No, I think that division is too tough. If we're talking about a team that's technically going to go from worst to first in the NFL this year, it's going to be the Bengals because they shouldn't have been a 4th place team. And I wager they'll go back somewhere high. But I think Detroit or I think Chicago, much like, I was a little optimistic that Washington could get a little boost with the changes that they've made, and they could be more competitive than people are expecting. I had Chicago finishing 9-8, just missing, but taking another step forward. And I think if they take another step forward, and if they are somewhere between the 7 and 10 win range, that Eberflus will be fine. I do think if they regress or they bottom out or they're 4 or 5 win team, there's no way he keeps his job. Jacob, what do you think for Eberflus?
Well, as someone who was actively rooting for the Vikings to trade for Justin Fields, I think that he has not had a very successful tenure. But much like we're talking about, a lot rides on this year then. They've put everything around him. I think that their GM has done an incredible job putting a team together that if he can't coach it, they're going to find someone who does. And so much about my prediction for this year kind of leans into this idea that they're going to go weeks 4 through about week 10 without losing a game. I think probably my hottest take for them is I think they're going to get on a roll there and win 6 games in a row, and that's where they're going to build their record. Down the stretch, it gets pretty tough with a lot of division matchups. But I think the biggest challenge in that stretch for them is really versus Jacksonville at a neutral location. And I think that if they're on a roll at that point, which is what I'm predicting, I think that the Bears come away with that win. And that's where I get kind of their win total and putting them in the hunt for that playoff spot.
Yeah. And I think they'll be competitive and they'll still be in the hunt down the stretch. I just don't think they'll be quite good enough to make that NFC field. But I like what they've done. I still think they would have made progress if they would have kept Fields too and drafted other players around him. And Dennis, you certainly make an excellent case that they are doing a lot more to set their new quarterback up for success than it feels like they did their old quarterback. But wasn't Fields the last pick before they changed GMs? Didn't they flush out GM, coach, everything? I think like everything changed. And the GM they have now was pretty strategic about saying, I'm going to bottom us out so that I can bring us back because I need to collect. Same way kind of what Caserio did in Houston. And at the beginning, you're like, this is the worst GM I've ever seen. This team sucks. But building assets, building tremendous cap space, which you almost have to do, then enables you, if you get the right players. I wouldn't be surprised if Chicago has a level of success similar to, Houston was only 9-8. They made the playoffs going 9-8, but they were only 9-8 last year, I think. Yeah. I think everybody in their division was 9-8. The entire division, just middle of the road.
It feels right.
Yeah. When it comes to the South, that's how it is. But I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know if that'll be good enough, given where some of the NFC teams are. But I think that they should be more fun to watch than they were 2 years ago. Also, not for you, Dennis, because you're not hoping for vast improvements for the teams against the Lions. But
well, no, it feels to me like they'll be down again this year. But then next year they take a big leap because they have, Caleb Williams with a year under his belt, and they'll have what's that?
And a new coach,
right? Could be.
Well, that'll do it for us for this episode. Jacob, thank you so much for joining us. Before I let you go, what are you most excited for this fantasy season?
It's exciting to see what's going to happen with the Vikings. When you come in with such low expectations, it's hard not to be excited then when things go well. So hopefully we do have a couple of surprises here or there.
As a Lions fan, I can relate to that.
But in terms of fantasy football, I'm in obviously this dynasty league. I'm in a couple other leagues where I'm the commissioner. As I said, year 10 of the home league, where last year I just won my second championship in that league. So 2 titles in 10 years, and that's a 14-team league. And so it's just, I love fantasy football. I'm excited that it's almost time for it to be back, and it's been fun to get a little bit more involved with Dynasty, a little bit more involved with some best ball drafts. I'm just already getting to that point where usually it takes me until August to get to that point. But now I'm excited and ready for the season to start.
And as somebody who has to play you week 1, I'm less optimistic. Let's say I was just looking at your team. You had quite a draft: Hurts and Cousins, Breece Hall, Olave, Michael Pittman, Devontae Smith. It's not going to be fun.
Yeah, I was pretty happy with how that draft fell. Cousins was the one he was probably the player I was most excited about when I drafted him, because I waited really long on that second quarterback. And I think it was somewhere in the 8th round, maybe, of our Superflex Dynasty draft. So obviously I know he's not going to be my quarterback for very long, but if he can bridge that gap and provide a couple of good statistical years, I could have a team that's at least seeing the playoffs.
Yeah, so that's gonna be fun. Our week 1 matchup. You'll be hoping Kirk Cousins comes back to play, and I'll be hoping that Joe Burrow's wrist is actually still attached to the rest of his arm.
That's right.
Yeah, there's been some talk going around. The wrist is an issue still.
I know. I don't want to hear it. My team is now named Joe Cool. He's got to be out there.
We may have to committee manage team number 8.
Yeah, I know. Well, I'll get it. I'll get it filled. We have some time. Well, that'll do it for us today. We will be back on Tuesday. We are moving to the AFC North, and we are going to be looking at the Ravens and the Steelers on Tuesday, and then the entire state of Ohio as we look at the Browns and the Bengals next Friday. So until then, I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. Thank you to Jacob for being here with us and enduring some of our fun jokes and takes here.
Yeah.
Dennis, if the people are lonely this weekend, what can they do to fill their time?
Well, they can do what I'm going to do tomorrow. I'm going to hop on my favorite podcast platform, type in the Fantasy Football Roundtable, and while I'm driving up to Cleveland for the live Scott Fishbowl draft at the I forget where it's at. Me and Dynasty Madman are riding up together. I think there's 3 divisions drafting. Listen to a little Fantasy Football Roundtable. Get myself prepared for the Scott Fishbowl draft. If you are out there and you're looking for great opportunities to give back, go to fantasycares.org. See what you can do. Just make a donation. Sign up for next year's Scott Fishbowl if you love fantasy football and you love doing good.
Can't do any better than that. Well, you guys have a wonderful weekend. Until Tuesday, take care.
Ciao.